Christie is a unique political figure in New Jersey history who has come at the right time and place when his skills and his will to impose a certain agenda are manifesting itself in a much more substantive way than any other governor. We've had other governors who have had the same kinds of goals of reducing the costs of government through consolidation and shared services. Most governors talk about it. Not everybody has the combination of the skill and the will, like Christie, as well as this moment in time. To explain this moment in time, I think you need to go back. Start in 1976. New Jersey imposes an income tax. At that point, we as a state, started getting into what I would call the property tax subsidy business. We effectively collected money and sent it back to people to offset their property taxes. Now, this was part of the Supreme Court, the New Jersey Supreme Court ruling that we had a unconstitutional way of funding our schools, and that places like Trenton and places like Princeton were simply not because they weren't providing the same kind of education. Let me clarify that. The schools that were property poor, like communities like Trenton, poorer communities, largely urban cities, but certainly some rural areas as well, they were not able to provide the same basic level of education that the Constitution guaranteed, the thorough and efficient education. Interestingly, when they put the words thorough and efficient and guaranteed every student that kind of education, they didn't define it. So this is why the courts have been involved for virtually since it was established in 1875. In 1976, it came to a head. The courts shut down the schools for a week in July. Brendan Byrne encouraged them to do this. He was the third governor in a row at that point who had been seeking an income tax in order to help fund the schools. What we've seen since that time is a huge spike in the growth of government. The amount of money that we take in, the amount of money that we spend, and the amount of money that we spend on education has gone astronomically high. And so you're talking about something that was a $10 billion enterprise is now a $30 billion, $32 billion enterprise that is state government. And the underlying thing behind this, leaving aside whether the spending on education has worked or not, the underlying principle, dynamic, is that we are taking money in and sending it back out to people and saying, here's a way to reduce your property taxes. We will subsidize the cost of your local government, municipal, local, and county, municipal, school. So both municipal government, school, your cost of local education, and your county to a lesser degree. But the state will collect money and then send it back out. So what does that mean? $32 billion budget, 75% of it, and this number has been relatively consistent over the last number of years, 75% of it goes back out the door. We don't spend $32 billion on state government. We spend a quarter of that on state government. We spend 75% of it going back out as grants, as aid, as most particularly, education aid. That's a system that can't sustain itself because you can never raise enough money to come in if you're sending it all back out the door. And it's also one of the reasons why trying to run New Jersey like a business is a good slogan, but it never really means anything because no business is sending all its money back out in coupons to its customers, which is effectively what we're doing. We're saying we're giving you the discount. We'll give you 20% off. But here it's, we'll send you $100,000. Why? So your town won't have to spend $100,000. Or we're sending you $1 million or $5 million. So this is, we have gotten, starting with the income tax in 76, we've built this up. And the system is falling under its own weight. What does that mean? Property taxes keep going up. And so the Governor Christie has come in at this moment when people are struggling So it's a bad economy. You have a system that simply doesn't seem to be working, because all we're trying to do is let's raise more money to send it back out the door. And he has imposed with the Democratic legislature, the 2% property cap. Now, the Democrats had a 4% property cap under Corzine, and it did pretty well. But there are questions about, you can say that, well, we're not going to raise the rate. We're going to spend less. The problem with that, of course, is that the just average cost, energy costs go up more than 2% or 4%, or healthcare costs in particular, or insurance costs, just the basic things, the general cost of living, inflation. So if that hits 4% and you're told to you're only allowed to increase 2%, what do you do? And that's why the big debate this was in the first year of Governor Corzine's term, over this 2%. Should it be constitutional? Should it be legislative? He agreed to a legislative, because that's how the Democrats were going to sign off on it. They weren't going to go with a constitutional amendment to make it only 2%. And there are a number of sort of unforeseen kind of reasons, things that might come up that, from a public policy perspective, you wouldn't want to restrict yourself in that way. But that's a real question. So what are the exemptions? What are the things that are outside of the cap? That was part of the debate. All of this gets to the heart of your question, which was, why do we see people trying to step over themselves and say, I'm in charge of consolidation? Because it's very clear that consolidation and shared services are the answer that any local unit of government has to step up and do, has to step up. This is the area in which they need to be involved with if they're going to find a way to manage a relatively hard 2% cap, and the fact that there's going to be less state funding, less money coming in. That's sort of that gives you a little bit of a historical overview about how we got here in this moment.
So that's great. I'm just trying to mark where we are. For my notes, that was 7 minutes,
okay.
And that's why I was looking at the thing. No, that's great, and I think you're right about the right governor at the right moment in an unsustainable system.
And that's why you see, just to be clear, so that's why you see Democrats and Republican mayors saying, we've got to talk about shared services. Dave Del Vecchio in Lambertville, or we'll sit there and say, and he's a partisan Democrat, but I got to find ways to buy salt together. I have to find ways to salt for spreading out during snowstorms, that kind of thing. Well, if we buy it in bulk, it'll be cheaper. Or if we share the 911 system, or computer services, or if we have somebody who is shared who does pickup here for our recycling, but does pick up on Tuesdays and Thursdays at a different town. These are ways in which towns have to be creative.
Do you think we'll get to the point, there are still technical things in the way, as you saw in Princeton, it was a couple of years, several years of referendums going down before they went up.
Right.
And I guess Kirillos and some others have at least floated the idea of getting rid of the referendum and just saying, and going to, as Marvin Reed said, a base closing model.
Right, yeah, the BRAC system, the
right.
base relocation and consolidation system.
What do you, so right now we're at a point where everything is kind of logical, and as you say, it's well, look, you've got to buy salt together, but that next point is more radical.
Right.
Now, what do you think about it? Are we still away from that, you think, or do you think Christie is the guy who's going to say, look, we're going to do it? What?
No, I think, okay, there's a couple questions there. First of all, the reason the BRAC idea, and just to be clear about what this is, when the United States government ended the Cold War, they realized they had way too many military installations built all over the place, and they had to close them down. The problem is, we in New Jersey, which had Fort Dix and Picatinny Arsenal and all these places, had and the Monmouth base, you have thousands of people who rely on these places. They're employed there, they do support services for there, they have the restaurant next door where all these people eat, so they are huge base no pun intended, but I mean they are base employment functions that they served for these communities, many of which were rural. So no member of Congress was ever going to agree to say, oh yeah, close mine. I mean, that just wasn't going to happen. And what they did, and actually a New Jersey guy, Jim Corder, who had run for governor in '89 against and lost to Jim Florio, was the head of it for a while. They established a commission, and they basically said, we're going to do our best to be a very nonpartisan, effective, look at the data, where do we need and what do we not need situation, and that's how we'll close it. And then all of this list, people will lobby us on who's going to be on the list. People give testimony. Congress would say, don't close my base. It's still worth it. We need these services, whatever it is. But once the list was created, the Congress had to vote on it, all of it, thumbs up or thumbs down. It didn't matter. So if there were 15 bases on it, it wasn't like you got to sign off on each one individually. All up, all down. And that was the idea that was floated for New Jersey. What if we put together a proposal for consolidating certain areas, and rather than sit there and we will impose it by the legislature, and we will then have just one big thumbs up or thumbs down on merging the donut hole and the munchkins, as they're often referred to, which are communities, for example, like Edison, where you have the township of Edison, and in the middle of it you have a separate township of Metuchen. So that becomes, why does that even exist here? You have to go around it. Police, each has their own police chief, each has their own clerk, each has their own DPW, etc. And there are a number of those around this state. So those might seem to be the easiest. There are a couple reasons why this never really took off. One in particular is what Brendan Byrne, the former governor, has called the religion in New Jersey politics, which is home rule. We have 566 communities. It's 565 once the Princetons officially merge come January. If you were designing a state on SimCity or some kind of computer program, you would never do it the way we did it. Alan Karcher, who's a former speaker and Central Jersey guy, the late Alan Karcher, wrote a book called Multiple Municipal Mammoths, which is a bit of a tedious history book, but it is the most comprehensive look at all the different ways we ended up here. And I'll give you an example. The Windsors. Windsor used to be Windsor, just was one place. But at a certain point in time, the state government didn't always do all the things we now expect it to do. At a certain point in time, things like roads were handled by your municipality. You raised the money for your roads. There was no interstate highway system. We're talking the 1800s and things like that. I won't say it's easy. When you see mergers in business, Verizon buys MCI or something like that. Boeing takes over McDonnell Douglas. Huge, massive, 25,000, 30,000 employees come together. We don't need 9,000 accountants here. Now we can get rid of. If they're not unionized, it's a whole lot easier. Or even if it is unionized, I mean, they have certain abilities to get things done. In government, it's much more difficult. And so from a short-term perspective, it actually costs you a little money, just as you try to reconcile salary structure, benefits. Well, what our town negotiated lower benefits. You're telling me now I'm going to save by offering everybody in their town, I now have to pay for higher benefits for my town? But we weren't, we negotiated this. Why are we coming to the... These become sort of some of the very data-driven logistical hurdles that have made something that everybody seems to understand much more difficult. This is why shared services is easier. Because, okay, that's joint purchasing. I get that. We're going to buy paper together. For our, we're going to have one contract, one guy who will help fix all our photocopiers or something. Mm-hmm. But when you actually do it, John McCormick, who's the mayor of Woodbridge, and Woodbridge is the ideal example of what you might want New Jersey to look like, but it developed it on its own. that is, there are 10 parts to Woodbridge. There's Avenel, Fords, Iselin, all those different, they have their own high schools, they have their own rivalries, but they're all part of one Woodbridge Township. There is one mayor, one council that runs it all. And so one could say, gosh, that's a way of what it should look like in the end.
Locally we have Hamilton sort of is on that model. Hamilton
Right.
has Yardville, Groveville, and if you talk to people who live in Hamilton, they say I live in Yardville or
Right.
Groveville.
Exactly.
So that's another example. I mean, I think what we're thinking about with the map is attaching some other things onto Hamilton, though. Like right next to Hamilton, you have Allentown, which is nothing, and
Right.
Robbinsville, which is a couple thousand people, and that doesn't make any sense to me. But maybe they need to go somewhere else. But like, why couldn't Allentown be another neighborhood of Hamilton? You know what I mean? Because Allentown, I believe, is a sending district anyway. Their kids go to
Right.
wherever, Lawrence or Waitstown.
One of the arguments you consistently have is that smaller is better. It's more efficient. It is, we can run it. Why do we have to go to some big bureaucracy in the town next door? Give me, you'll see mayors, particularly mayors, because it's their job that's being lost.
Yeah.
And they'll say, show me an example of where bigger government made sense, or somehow merged government made sense. The two responses to that are the U.S. Army and regional school districts. And so regional school districts on a level that we all sort of understand, everybody just begins to send, and it makes more sense than everybody having their own individual school. Of course, they all want their own elementary school because little kids we care about more. But the U.S. Army, right? We don't all have militias to fight off the Nazis. We had one group, and we all got together, and this was how it worked. So these questions have been around, obviously, for 250 years, 300 years. You could add them in, but they might say, why? We're okay with our thing. I like my own community. I feel I will lose something, whether it's town identity, and that's that home rule stuff, the responsiveness of my government, if I go to become part of a bigger thing. The only thing you can sell, the reason you're even talking about this in the first place, is that your property taxes are going to go down. You simply spend too much. I think the Christie idea, because you had asked about, is he the one to force this? In Ronald Reagan's budget director was a guy named David Stockman. Wrote an interesting book, and part of about his sort of days as they were trying to cut government then. And he said the way we had to cut government is that we had to starve the beast. The only way to reform the welfare state as they saw it was to simply deny it money to do it, and then they would change. Then they would get more efficient. I think Governor Christie has the same kind of approach here. That if you cap spending what they can increase their property taxes by, and then you start reducing the amount of money that can go to them. This 10% across the board tax cut is not just your income taxes. According to the Constitution of New Jersey, every dollar of the income tax is dedicated towards property tax relief. So you end up with, you're pushing down on the income tax, we're paying less, but ordinarily your property taxes would go up. Now you've capped them. So you can't go up like a beanbag, where you push down on one side and it goes up on the other. So if you have to if you're stuck, towns are now forced.
Right. Now you're talking.
That is the way to get this done. I think that's it in terms of, if you have a vision for trying to understand where the Christie administration is trying to take this issue of consolidation, property taxes, and just our general size of government, he would say, I think it seems clear to me, let's put it that way, I don't know if he would say it. It seems clear to me that they're trying to starve the beast. We are not going to subsidize local government anymore. And not only that, we're going to prevent you from raising that kind of money that we're going to now cut to you in property taxes. And so it's going to be up to you folks to figure this out, which leaves most municipalities with some really tough options. Either you cut full-day kindergarten, which is a huge burden on parents. You cut after-school programs. You cut the DARE program. You cut computer work. You don't pick up your garbage more than once a week now, rather than people who got used to it for being twice a week. You lay off people. You don't have the money. You just lay them off. So all of these, and so suddenly you can't do certain things that you wanted to do. And if people want to see those services redeemed, then the argument is, get over yourself, figure out a way to start looking at other towns and rethinking the boundaries of your community and what kind of efficiencies that matter. The difficulty comes not only in that psychological hurdle, but also in the very real data-driven hurdle. How does this work? Which is why you had that, one of the things that Christie helped do that really pushed that Princeton merger together was that he said, I'll pay for the study. The state will kick in this money because you have to have some smart people who come in from the outside who look at it, who don't live there, who look at it and say, well, here's what you're paying, your DPW and their DPW. And here's how many people you're going to really need if you want to provide this level of service. And if you want to cut it, and here's how you're going to merge the different things. All of those kinds of things have to be looked at.
Okay.
I know I've sort of been talking.
No, we
but hopefully-
appreciate it. I think you hit on all the major things that I've had. Do you guys have any? I mean, let's kill that now, Joe.
Sure.